All right, so we're going to be creating a React app. I'm going to call it Counter App, and then we're going to be using Redux. The reason I'm making this video is because I constantly forget how to use Redux. I always have to go back and kind of go through all the tutorials and relearn it because I hardly ever use it in production. But I really just want to record this video and kind of just guide you or anybody who watches this into how to implement Redux for your state management. What we're going to do here is we're going to create a very simple application that just does that just has one component, counter component, and that component will display a number starting with 0, and then it will also have a button that will increment by 1. So anytime you press it, it'll keep adding 1. So it'll be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, etc. And then obviously we're going to be using Redux for our state management. I kind of already set up the project. If you're not familiar with React, it's very simple to start a project. You just have to use npx and then create React app, and then you call it whatever. I called it Counter Redux. I already ran that. And then alternatively, or additionally, sorry, you have to install Redux. So you do npm install Redux. I already did it, but I'll do it really quick. And once this completes, you also need to install the React Redux. So we'll do npm install React Redux. And the reason you need this one is so that the Redux library can bind to React. So this React Redux library has a language that kind of binds the two together so you can use it. All right, cool. So let's go ahead and open up our code editor. So I use VS Code. And as you can see here, I kind of just started stubbing it out. When you first create a React project, they're going to give you a ton of files. I kind of like to remove the ones I'm not going to need. And this is what kind of the way it starts. So I'm just going to go ahead and start. Let me just do a quick thing here. Div, and then we'll just do p, and then we'll do I. And let's just start this npm start to start the server. And if everything goes well, we should have a nice little hi. All right, there you go. So we got React running. So let's go ahead and open up our code editor, console, and I think we're good to go. So essentially, when you're working with Redux, you want to create something called an action and a reducer. Essentially, the action is going to be something that you trigger, that you declare. Like, say, we're going to declare an action called increment. You could also declare an action that is called maybe decrease or reset or clear or something like that, or multiply by 5. Whatever you want to do, that's where your actions would be. Within your action, you're also going to be providing some information. That could be a number, that could be some other object, or whatever payload you want to send to the state. So essentially, let's go ahead and first create, let's create our action. Let me see. So we want to create two simple functions, and one of them is going to be returning a action object, and the other one is going to be returning a new state with like the incremented count. So essentially, every time we send information to the reducer, it's going to be returning that incremented count, and the new number essentially. So let's go ahead and first let's create our counter component. So we will create a new file in here in our source, and we will call this counter.js, and we will be we need to import React from React, and let's go ahead and just create this really quick. So function counter empty for now, and then we will be returning a div, and inside of here we we'll keep this very simple. We'll just make it a paragraph tag. For now, let's just stub it as like 0. And we will also need a button that says increment. Okay, and let's close this here. And for now, that seems okay. And we will also export it. Export default counter. So that way we can, we can export it. That way we can import it over here in index. I'm gonna actually put this over here so I can see both. And now we can do import counter from counter. And now we will change this, and we will actually call the counter component. So this should render here. Okay, there you go. So as you can see, we have our 0 and we have our increment button, but right now it doesn't do anything. I have no functionality set up for this. Okay, so now we need to declare our action. So for that, let's go ahead and create it in here in our component. So this will be our action. And this will be what we send over to our reducer eventually. So we are going to call a function, create a function called it increment counter. And for this, we'll be providing it a number. So we'll be sending a number into it. And we will be returning a type. And this is where we're going to be declaring the type to be increment. And this is in lowercase, as you know, it's just kind of best practice. So just put your types as in uppercase. And then we're going to be sending this number, and we're just going to declare it as num, lowercase, and it'll be num. Okay. So this is our action. It's just an object that sends a type and then a payload. Okay. Now let's go over to our index, and we will actually be creating our reducer. So let's create our reducer. But before you do that, you always have to kind of create your initial state, like what's it going to start at? And we know we want to start this at 0. So let's go ahead and create a, declare a variable called, or a const called initial state. That way we know that, you know, and in here it's an object, so you could always have like various different things that get updated. But for now, we're only worried about the count, and we're going to be starting it at 0. Okay, and now we can create our, let's create our reducer. So we'll create a function, and we'll just call it reducer for now. And here, we're going to be declaring a variable called state, which is going to be taking in the initial state up here. So we want to set state equal to initial state. And we're going to be taking in an action. Oh. Let's close this thing out. Okay, so the action is going to be fed from here. So essentially what we're going to do is we're going to connect these two using Redux functions and React Redux functions so that these two can easily talk back and forth. But for now, let's go ahead and declare, let's create this reducer. And usually reducers in Redux use a switch statement. So we're going to do switch and then action, taking in the type. So this is the action. We're going to be listening in for the type. And so here, if the case is increment, then we want to do the following: return, lowercase, return the count, and have it be whatever the state is, state.count, which is this number over here. So it's the brought in state.count. And we want to make sure that we add it, or we add the number from the action. So we declare this as action, and we will be adding the number. So essentially take this 0 and then increment it by whatever number gets piped into this function. All right? And then you also always want to provide a default case for your switch statement. You will return, if it's just default, if nothing is brought in or whatever, it'll always return the state, whatever the state is at that time. That's cool. Awesome. All right. So the next thing we need to do is we actually need to create a store. And this is what will be essentially listening in, or it'll be reaching out to our reducer on a constant basis to kind of like, it's like the main catalog of information where we keep all the information. And it constantly monitors the reducer to ensure that we have that updated all the time. And the store is what's going to be shared among the different components to ensure that all the components know what has been updated, what's new, what's currently updated, right? So we first need to import the store. So we will import the store up here. And it's something called create. Let's create store. And we're going to be bringing in this one from Redux. All right. And while we're at it, we're also going to be bringing in something called provider. So I'm just going to go ahead and add it now, and I'll explain it shortly. And this one comes in from our React Redux library. All right, cool. So to create the store, we call the create store function, which takes the reducer in as its parameter. So let's go ahead and call that. So we will declare const store, and we will run the create store, and we will pass in the reducer. Okay. We need to encapsulate this in within provider. So what we're going to do is we're going to put this on the second line, and we're going to wrap counter with provider. That way provider takes in store, and it takes in this object of store. Okay. Oops. There we go. Just kind of make it look pretty. So essentially, anything that you put in here, you could put additional components. They will all kind of flow within the provider. That way you're always looking at this store object and can pass it through as a prop. All right. So yeah, so the provider takes the store as an attribute and it makes it available to its child components. Awesome. Okay, so now that we've done all that in our main file, we actually need to do a little bit of additional work in our component. That way the component knows how to reach out to the main component and pull in information as props, and that way it actually can listen in and dispatch and send these actions over to our reducer. So we kind of need a two-way communication, and for that we need to set up something that's called connecting to the store using a connect function. So that connect function takes in two additional functions. One is called MapStateToProps. Just put it here. MapStateToProps and MapDispatchToProps. So what MapStateToProps, this is called every time that the store state changes, and it receives the state as a parameter and returns the state for the component. So, and then the other one is MapDispatchToProps. This parameter is used to map the dispatch functions to props. It can just be a simple object, and it just defines a function that needs to be mapped. So essentially, what we want to declare a function that's called MapStateToProps so that we can push this action over to our reducer. All right, so what we're going to do first is we're going to declare this MapStateToProps, and all you have to do is create a function MapStateToProps, and we're going to be passing in the state, and we're going to be returning count is equal to state.count. That way, when it brings in the state in, we know what the count is at all the time, and then we can just call props.count, and we will be able to have the actual state at all times. So, and then we also need to declare this one here, the map dispatch props. That way we can shoot the action over to the reducer. So let's go ahead and declare const map dispatch props is equal to this object, and we're just going to be using this increment counter. That's going to be the one that's going to be shooting off the action. All right. Now, what we need to do is we need to actually connect it. So now we just declared it here, but how do we actually connect it between the two? So that's when we need to use that connect function, and we need to import that as well over here. So we need to import connect from our React Redux. All right. So as you see here, I'm going to move this actually down. Move this to the bottom here. Move this up a little bit. All right, so right now all we're simply doing is we're exporting default so we can declare it over here, right? But what we need to do now is we need to bind or connect these two declarations with counter. That way, when you export it, you're actually exporting this counter, but you're exporting like a updated version that also carries these two things. You want to carry the map state to props, and you want to carry the map dispatch to props. So in order to do that, that's when we utilize this connect function. So we're going to kind of update this a little bit. So we're going to do connect, and we're going to call map state to props, and we're going to call, let's see, so we can see everything. We're going to map dispatch to props, and then we're going to encapsulate this here so that they get bound together. So when you shoot off, you export this connect, it actually carries these two together. So just to review, the map state to props, it just simply returns the state variables as props to this component or to any component. And the map dispatch to props allows to define how we dispatch actions, this action, and make the dispatching functions available as props. Cool. All right, so now we need to, now that we have these two connected, we should be able to access the store in our component. So we need to be able to reach out and grab this. And in this counter, as we declared here, map state to props, we should now be able to bring in props. So by declaring this, React Redux allows us to bring in props. And now we can do things like declare what the actual prop count is. So we should go in here. Actually, let me update this to 2, just so you can see. Okay, so it's 2. So now we should be able to declare props.count. So we want to make sure that we're bringing in the 0. So let's save and refresh. And there you go. See, so it's pulling, if I were to change this to 20, it should reach 20. So now we know that we have our child component and our main component connected using these map state to props and match this. Well, just map state to props. We haven't tested this. All right. So let's go ahead and update our button. So we update our button, we want to make sure we call a function. So on click, when you click it, we want to run a function, and we will call this increment click. So when you click it, every time it's going to run increment click, but we don't have that function yet. So let's declare that. We will declare it inside of here. Function increment click, and it's just console log you clicked. Okay. All right, so it works, right? Every time you click, it runs this. But what we really want to do here is we want to call this action, and we want to make sure that it updates the reducer, or it runs through the reducer to update our state. So how do we do that? So we know that we can bring in props because we did map dispatch to props. So we'll do props, and we will call this function the increment counter, and we will pass it a number. So we agreed that we were going to be updating everything by one number. So we will be passing the number 1. So in this case, every time you click it, it'll reach out to props, it'll run increment counter with number 1, it'll shoot this action over to a reducer, therefore updating our state and adding 1 to it. As we see here, right here. All right, so let's see if this really works. Look at that. So it's incrementing by 1. So we pass 1 as the argument for the increment counter, making the counter increment by 1. This increment parameter is handled in the reducer, so here. All right. And one thing to know, I know I touched on it again earlier, but the connect, it returns a new component. So in here, when we declare connect, we're returning a new component, which just wraps the component received. So, and I know this seems like a ton of code for like a simple counter app. However, this architecture is great when you're building large-scale apps that use many components, multiple level of nesting, and manage a lot of data. So, once you start getting very complicated, when you have multiple levels of of components and going back and forth, it's really important to maintain one store in one state, so that you don't have to be sending props with multi-levels. This makes it a lot simpler. Okay, cool. So I think we're done here. So as you can see, I'm just gonna, in my requirements, I said it would start at 0. So I'm gonna reset my initial state to 0. I'm going to save and refresh. So here we go. So let's see if this works. There you go. And I'm going to clean this up a little bit by removing this console log. Refresh again. And there we go. We have a working app. So how do we update this? What if we want to actually, we have increment, but let's quickly add onto it. This is usually the part where I forget. So like, how do I update my app if I want to add an additional feature? If I want to add a decrease button. So we're going the other way, right? So let's do that. So the first thing we want to do is probably just add we want to add a new action. So because this action is going to be adding right here, we want to add a new function that decreases. So I will declare a new action, and we'll call it decrease counter. We will also be taking in a number, return, and the type will be decrease. And we will also be sending in as a payload a number, so num. All right. Now over here, we want to make sure that this decrease counter gets also sent to the dispatch. So we will call decrease counter in here. That way it's available, and we will create a new button. So let's create a new button here. Click. We want to call a function that we're going to call, we'll just go the same way, decrease click, and we will decrease. See what shows up. Oh, I haven't defined this function, so function decrease click. There we go. So it doesn't do anything yet. Let's test the console log. Decrease. All right, cool. All right, we got it working. So in here, what we want to do is we want to props, and we're going to be using this action. So decrease counter, and we're going to be decreasing it. Let's decrease by 3. Let's see what happens. Okay. All right. So we have our action. We have added a new function within our within our component that will call that action and send it over to the reducer. We've created a button that calls that function, and we've added that decrease counter action into our MapStateToProps. So now we need to go over here, and we actually need to add a new case so that it listens in for that action. So we'll do decrease. And we will return count, and that'll take the current count and state, and we'll be subtracting the action, the number from the action, which in this case will be 3. All right, so let's see the moment of truth. All right, so we'll start with incrementing. All right, and let's try a decrease button. There we go. It looks like we got it working. So that's just a quick little, well, it wasn't really quick, but it's just a video that I really wanted to make so that I can reference this back, and if I ever need to use Redux, I know how to use it, and it's, I can quickly take a look at this and just see how to go forward with it. Hopefully, if you watched it all the way to the end, this has kind of served, it worked for you, and you understand how to use this a little better. Hopefully, this works out for you, and you got some benefit from it. Thank you for watching.